some notes in the solution file about what I'm going to do here using the wizard. Now, you could, of course, just I have in here also T-SQL to create the extended events trace. I think it's useful to understand how to use the wizard as well, because composing this T-SQL is not always the most fun. When I am setting up extended events traces, I need to, first of all, go into the right bucket to create the trace. I was under the database before. If I expand my management folder, this isn't underneath the databases. If I expand management here, I have an extended events bucket. And I can see all of my current sessions that I have running. I don't currently have this session created. At the end of the script, there's something to go ahead and drop it for you. So I'm going to right-click on extended events, and that doesn't get me anywhere. I constantly do this. You need to right-click on sessions. And let's see if we can zoom on this one. Yes, I can zoom on the left of the screen. That's cool. There's two wizards. One of them is called a wizard. One of them is not called a wizard. I find the wizard who doesn't call itself a wizard to be easier to work with. I actually don't find the one, I suppose the idea behind the one with the word wizard in it is that it's supposed to be simpler. I don't personally find it simpler. I just only ever use new session, and I think it's fine even if you're starting out to use the new session one. I don't particularly understand why we have both, but sometimes that's just how it is. I'm going to give my trace the same name that I have in my script. Of course, you can name it whatever you want, but I'm going to name it the same name, and I'm not going to use a template. We are now on the general page. I have the option to start the event at server startup if I want, or start it after session created. I'm going to start it with a T-SQL command after I make sure I have it right. When it comes to events, this is part of where things get tricky in extended events, because if I just search for fail in event names only, I get a lot of events here, a lot of different options to sort through. I could search for the word force, but I may or may not find events that are exactly matching. And I purposefully tried to kind of give you the opportunity to explore the different events for a reason. You can highlight them and look at the name. This one is query store failed to load forced plan. And this is fired if the query failed to load the forced plan from query store, forcing policy will not be applied. We also have query store notify force failure. We can also search for just once. So what I often do is I search for a word that kind of looks right. I sometimes will search on a search engine. Once I find, oh, okay, here's a group. Okay, I actually want to look at all the query store events and browse through those. And I'll be like, okay, well, what are all my failures? I failed to capture queries. I failed to flush, failed to load force plan. Okay, well, this is kind of looking good. Let's see. There's still other resources in here. And sometimes the hardest part of extended events is finding the right event. In this case, the event I do want to use is query store plan forcing failed. Query store plan forcing failed. This event occurs when forcing of plan from query store fail, right? That's our type here. So I'm going to choose that one, select that event, and then I need to configure the event. I don't always have to configure the event, but if I want to put a filter on here, like for some events, maybe I only want to trace for certain sessions or for certain databases. But in this case, we have instructions of we want to capture some extra global fields. We want to capture session ID and SQL text. If I want to add global fields, I can find them in this tab here. I can also switch if I want to do a filter, I can switch to there. I can also look at just the event fields. These are the fields that come with the event. I'm going to get the plan ID, the query ID, a message, and an error number. Well, that's cool. Those seem great. I want to also add session ID. Check that off. And then I also want the SQL text to be added there. All right, that's great. If I click select here, I can go back to this. I have one event there. If I go to data storage, here's where I decide what target am I going to use, or where are the results from this going to be stored. From this one, we want to do an event file. That was in our problem, was set up an event file target for this. And you can do multiple targets as well. We just want to say, okay, store this in a trace file. I get to pick where do I want to put my trace file. I like to keep mine on my S drive in the X events folder there, and I need to provide my trace file with a name. Ideally, I would like to actually provide it with the name of my trace. In this case, I'm just going to give it the name of the event. That's always, I mean, you can collect more than one event, so using the event name doesn't always work. It would be better to use my general name here, but I am being really lazy on this. We can configure how big the files are, how much we want to retain. I'm going to go with a lot of the default options on this. The one that I'm going to change, and this is simply, I am only changing this for testing. You can set how much latency can happen between the event happening and it showing up in the file. Since I don't want to wait 30 seconds, like the maximum of 30 seconds of, is it done yet during the demo? I'm going to go ahead and set this to 5 seconds. I'm going to stick with single event loss. I'm going to try to keep this as light as I can on the instance. Some traces can be heavy. Anytime we're setting up a trace, we do need to be careful and monitor, is this causing a performance problem? Some of the famous things that can slow an instance down are collecting execution plans. Even collecting estimated execution plans can really tax the performance, but also tracing. Some events may produce a lot of detail. Like if you start tracing locks on a live production instance, you could really slow it down, both with extended events and with SQL Trace. All right, so I'm going to click OK here. And since we're testing this, we're going to see exactly how often, does it pick up the failures, and exactly how often is it seeing these failures as well. Now that I've created the session, I need to refresh up here in Object Explorer to see the session. I could right-click and say start if I wanted. One of the things that I actually just forgot to show you is we can always script our session out. And I really love, one of the things that I've come to take for granted about Management Studio that is just very cool long-term is the ability for the way they build the wizards and let us script so many things out is very, very cool. They didn't have to build SQL Server like that. And I think it's really nice that they've made these wizards do it. That way I can script this out and see, here is if I want to do a change control for this, if I want to record it in a ticket, if I just want to keep my notes on it, it's going to be very easy to reproduce this elsewhere or to log this in some fashions. I can see exactly what event is being kept. That's the event I have chosen. Here is in the action are those global fields that I added. Here is the target, the event file target where I'm storing the data, and the options that I chose, including this option that I am just using for testing, not recommending for production use. Love that they let us do this. We can also script from inside the wizard as well. If I look at the properties of this, there is a scripting button in here. You can script out even before you finish configuring your trace if you want to ask a question about it, for instance. Very handy. All right, I am now going to start my event session, alter event session, session name on server, state equals start. I have sometimes wondered, where would it be if it wasn't on a server? Maybe someday it'll be somewhere else as well. I'm going to do a little Shift Control R to try to get IntelliSense to be a little happier. Oh, IntelliSense is mad because I'm not in the right database. I need to use the correct database so that IntelliSense sees that I do, in fact, have a procedure named dbo.freezeme. All right, let's refresh over here. And now we see that our session is running. I am going to right click here and say watch live data. I don't always like to do this. In production, I would rather just read data from the file. This hopefully has been fixed. It was a little buggy and weird when the GUI for this first came out. So I tend to be a little hesitant about it. We're going to go ahead and run our first statement here. we're running, and it's fine that no rows come back. For this query, I've set a high limit for the total name count. The query does run successfully. Looking at our live data for this trace, nobody's showing up for this first run. Well, that's interesting, right? Let's go ahead and let's put our live data. Let's see if I can get this into a new vertical tab group. There we go. So we can watch that over there as we run things. Our second test statement is a similar command. It has a with recompile at the end. One of the tricky things about testing different events, different extended events, is sometimes you start testing it and you see nothing in your test trace that, on your little repro instance that you've got, and you're like, oh, well, my event may just not work. Sometimes we have to be a little creative about our testing because sometimes events are a little funny and they only fire under certain circumstances. This second statement, let's go ahead and run it. It says, do not use an execution plan that is in cache and do not cache my execution plan to be reused by anyone else. That's going to give me a very special plan. Now, our live data isn't showing up over here. It's not showing anything. Let's open up our file and see. Cannot view this because that's interesting. Let's refresh here. Well, this, that's interesting. I may have refreshed at the wrong level. Let's refresh at the extended events level. Let's open this here. And it is still not liking the file I have set up. All right, and I'm not getting, I think there may be a problem with the trace that I've set up here. That is very interesting. All right, well, let's step back through this. And I am going to, it was able to start the trace successfully. Let's go ahead and look at, in my S drive, let's look at my files here. I do have a file here. The file is 0KB. I'm just going to double click the file and see if it relaunches a management studio, if it can open the file. It should be able to open the file even if the file is empty. And it is able to open the file. I even have a row in the file. It actually has captured information. What happened when I double clicked the file, it just opened I now have 2 management studios open. It opened a new instance of management studio and viewed the files. The trace is working. The trace is writing to the file. The instance of management studio that I had open is not happy about reading the file, which is interesting. And I wonder if it is related to me saying I wanted to watch the live data. I'm not actually quite sure. Let's go ahead and I'm going to just close down when Management Studio, there's a legacy framework they have to work with in Management Studio. And I do believe the SQL Server team absolutely does their best with the baggage that it has along with it. But when Management Studio starts to act a little funky on me, I close and relaunch. So let's now see in a fresh new Management Studio if I can open the file this way. I am now going to go into query store plan, forcing failed. And in fact, now I can open the file this way. So we will just, in our fresh new Management Studio, we will also open the solution file. That's great. I actually think this is great for a demo. If you experience weirdness, it's not just you. And I do have a deep suspicion that this is perhaps related to the way I watch the data, but I don't have proof. Now, notice on my timestamp here that I only have one row that my trace picked up from today. These other 3 rows are from when I tested this yesterday. So since I set up this trace today, I have run 2 statements. Only one statement is caught in the trace. What detail can we get about it? Here is the message tab, and how I got these columns up here, by the way. It has remembered I added these columns to this trace before, and it has remembered this. By default, when you first are looking at the results on a trace, you won't see all these columns. You can right-click and say choose columns to determine which of these columns do you want over here. And I clicked this double arrow button to get them all over there. That's why I have all that detail there. For the failure that I had today, if I want to read the messages down here, I still can. For the message, I've just popped that up and it says, here is the index that I don't see. So that's very nice that I get that detailed message. And it says, you know, it's acting like I created a use plan hint and said, use this plan. Behind the scenes, it's saying, hey, I want you to use this plan. It wants me to put the index back or unfreeze the plan and freeze a different plan, or just go with the change. But I love that I am getting the detail on the exact index that doesn't exist. I can get that with the query store plan forcing failed event. I also can see the session ID that executed this, that failed. I can see the SQL text. The one that generated this event was the tsql command that used with recompile at the end. When I first ran this query, when I first was testing this, let's use the right database again, and it's the 2017 version of this that I'm in. When I ran this first command, the plan that it got for it was already in the execution plan cache. That did not trigger the event. The event only fired when I said, don't use a plan in the cache. You've got to come up for me. I want you to come up with a fresh plan. Well, let's test this theory. If I clear out the procedure cache for my database, which means, I mean, I can run this again. Let's run this, and we're going to put the first statement common in there so it's really clear it was first statement. That should not be caught by the trace. Let's see if we can refresh our file. I have this open right here. I'm going to reopen my file here. And I still have only one row for the 21st there. If I clear out the procedure cache from my database, which in a production environment would impact all of the queries in my database, on their next run, they would have to get a new plan. So this isn't the only way you can clear a plan out of cache for something. I'm just saying for the whole database, go ahead and do it because this is a test situation. I'm now going to run third statement. I don't have a recompile hint on it. I'm just saying I want you to run, but now there's not an execution plan in cache for it. And then let's also, for fun, run fourth statement as well. After this, if I open my trace file here, what do we have in here? Well, we still only have one from the 21st. Let's go ahead and reopen it. Now, see, this is the little bit of lag. It doesn't write to this file synchronously. And for performance reasons, that's actually great. Now, I do have another row for the failure here. This was third statement. This was the one that ran right after I cleared the procedure cache from my database. So I don't have to use a recompile hint to see it here, but I don't have fourth statement here. I have only the time it had to compile a query, whether that was because there was a recompile hint saying don't use a plan in cache, or the plan was not in cache because the cache was cleared. Another way that I can force a recompile, I can run the existing, this is a bonus one that wasn't in your challenge script. I can run sp recompile, a built-in procedure. In this case, I'm running it against the procedure name, dbo.freezeme. You can also run sp recompile against a table name. That will force anything that uses the table to have to get a new plan the next time they run. It will take out locks against the table that can cause blocking in busy environments. You do have to be careful, monitor when you do that to make sure you don't cause a huge blocking chain in a busy environment. But now that I did that, let's run bonus statement. And if we allow a second or two, let's see if we allowed long enough and reopen our file there, bonus statement is appearing right there and did show up in the trace because I said you have to get one after you compile. So what we found in our testing is the event that I selected does work for this, but it only is giving us detail about these failures when it does need to compile a plan. If it is simply using a plan that's in cache, it doesn't fire this event. And I think that's not a bad thing in terms of performance. What if this was a frequently run procedure? Would I really want it filling the log every time it ran? Now let's do an extra test. Let's go a little off-road and do a little extra test. We're going to open our problem file again. And now I'm going to actually change the query, and we're going to reforce it and recreate this. Let's get a little fancier just for fun. I'm going to go, we're connected to the right database. That's really nice. I'm going to go ahead and say, use a recompile hint. And actually for fun, let's put the recompile hint at the top of the procedure. This is kind of an evil recompile hint. In fact, it's an evil recompile hint. If you're going to use recompile hints, do not do this. Put recompile hints on the individual queries that you want to recompile, because if we just put it in the headers of the procedure, we are making them invisible to the plan cache, and we should be thoughtful about, recompiles are generally money. We should be more thoughtful about what we make to recompile. But I am going to leave the query text the exact same. And that means that the forcing of the query text will be the same, which I think is interesting in this case. So we have altered our procedure, and the procedure now has recompile up there. And I want to see, is this still trying to force it? So this would have, by altering the procedure, I'm going to have to get a next plan the next time it runs. I'm going to have to get a new plan the next time it runs. Now I'm still getting results back. That's great. Am I still seeing that it is a forced plan in Query Store? I do have a last forced failure reason description coming up here. And let's also look at, I can see I have last execution time. I don't have last forced failure time. That's right. Dang it. All right, well, let's see, did it show up in our trace? I'm going to reopen our trace. See here with the recompile hint in it. Actually, so I said it's going to have to recompile because I changed the procedure. It's also going to have to recompile because I put a recompile hint in the top of the procedure. So here we go at 9:37 a.m. Pacific time. I did get a row for this in there with total name count of 30. And what I want to know now that I have put this in there, let's see, total name count of 30. This is I ran that one right there. I'm now going to go ahead and run this 3 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There is a recompile in the definition of this procedure, which is saying don't reuse a plan, don't cache a plan. So now that this happens, making sure I've talked enough so that we've had a little enough time for this to show up. Sure enough, now I am getting more rows in here. Now, the moral of the story is not that you should put recompile in all your queries, so if they fail, you get detail on their call. It's simply more confirmation that this event is only firing when we get a fresh compile. The takeaway I would take from this is when you are testing out certain events that are looking at some things in extended events, if you aren't seeing things show up in your trace, think about things like, might this event only collect data when a query compiles for the first time? Because that might be one of the things that could cause you to pull your hair out and get really frustrated. Like, why are events not showing up in my trace? That can be one of the ones that does it. If you're new to extended events, there can be other things that are just weird and awkward to get used to. Like I said, why are there 2 wizards? I like the one that doesn't call itself a wizard. I wouldn't deal with learning 2 of them. Just learn 1. There's also, sometimes you may be looking for a specific event that you've read about on the internet and you won't see it in the wizard. There is a secret channel. And even when I read a blog post about this channel, I was like, what? How do I get there? So I've taken a very careful screenshot. That caret next to channel, I thought it would just change the sort order. No, if you click the down caret on channel, it brings up a menu for what channels do you want to see. And there is one channel that by default is hidden because the events in the debug channel, or debug, depending on where you're from, the events in this channel often can hurt performance. Sometimes they're really detailed stuff that may overload your trace. Now, there's actually some cool stuff in there that are more new lightweight extended events. Yes, they are for debugging. So I'm not saying never use stuff in the debug channel, but just be careful with any trace and performance. But the debug channel is by definition something we should use with caution. You can check off debug, and then after you check off that button, you will then be able to search for those events in the GUI. It only took me like 4 years to figure that out. Is it 4 years? Yeah, probably 5 years actually to figure that out. If you're configuring multiple events, this also took me a really long time to figure out. So this is just a screenshot of I selected 2 somewhat random events. If you wanted to add a filter to those, or they had similar global actions you wanted to check, you can highlight both events and set filters or check global fields for both of them. You don't have to individually click on the event, add the filter, go back, click on the event, add the filter, etc. You can highlight multiple events and configure them, which for some reason I really didn't figure out for a very long time. And as I showed you, I love scripting these things out. So here we are. Any questions about this? Any comments or any thoughts? I love that I got that weird, mysterious failure with the event file target. I'd like to say it doesn't happen that often anymore, but it isn't completely unknown for things like that to happen. It's sort of a fact of life.